Hi, this is Camels with Hammer Show, episode 3, part 2. And part 1, we got cut off because of technical difficulties and we made another attempt. But now we're going to do part 2 here for another half an hour with James Croft of the Harvard Humanists. Um, I am, at the end of part 1, I was asking James about the problem of privilege. And what I was asking was basically members of socially privileged groups, advantaged groups, tend to not have access to experiences and experiential content of what it's like to be members of marginalized groups. And as a result, it's argued that members of marginalized groups have sort of an experiential content and an understanding of the real ways it is to be a marginalized member of society in some way or another, that gives them an epistemic advantage, an access to knowledge that members who aren't people who aren't members of those groups don't have. And so I was asking about what the limits and the extent of that are. I was trying to say that at a certain point, like when can a member of a non-marginalized group say that they have come to the point that they've heard enough and they've listened, and now they're going to think for themselves, reason for themselves, come to moral conclusions for themselves, trying to take into account what they learned from listening to the marginalized other. Is there a certain point at which the marginalized other can say no? If you don't agree, it's purely because you still just don't, you're still just privileged, and ignore arguments being made, or say that the arguments can never account for what the privilege tells someone. And so I asked that to James, and James, what would you have
Yeah.
to say to that?
Well, I find it a really difficult question to answer, and it's a sort of very personal one. My personal experience is kind of tied up in how I'd want to respond to that question because I only came out a couple of years ago, 2.5 years ago or so, at 27, so it's quite late by today's standards. And before that, I'd been living my life as a straight man, dating women and just kind of struggling with that aspect of my life. And that experience has kind of informed how I think about this sort of question because before I came out, I read a lot about privilege. I read my bell hooks and other writers who sort of write about these things, and I thought I really understood it, and I thought I was sympathetic and really got the idea of how privilege works and could listen to people but disagree and have my own view and things like that. And then after coming out, it just totally changed my perspective. I basically realized, just being honest, how clueless I had been, just speaking for myself, about privilege and how it works in the area of homophobia and heteronormativity, for example. And I remember powerfully when I had that realization. It was the first time I went to Provincetown after coming out. And Provincetown, for people who don't know, is kind of gay mecca in the United States, as everyone there is gay. And I was surrounded by all these gay people, and I had this profound feeling of being at home and of being safe that was different to something I'd ever experienced because I kind of always felt safe as a straight white guy, normally, and then coming out and having those experiences, and then just having this real experience of being surrounded by people who are like me in a really important way was not had become uncommon. It really changed my view, and I realized that there is an experiential component to this, which I don't think you can easily have if you're not a member of a particular group. And so what that leads me to try and do when I'm discussing these issues, so when I'm discussing with a person of color about their experience, when I'm discussing with a person with a disability about their experience, for example, is to try and be very humble and to recognize that however much I think I'm understanding them, I still am missing a crucial experiential component. That being said, I also recognize from my own experience that I can be wrong, and I can advance views or arguments that, on reflection and in dialogue with other people, dialogue with people who are not gay, or dialogue with people who haven't had the experiences I've had. I can change my mind, and I can recognize that I've been incorrect, and I don't. In principle, I hope it's the case that I don't think it's ever legitimate simply to say to someone, you haven't had the experiences that I've had, and therefore you're going to basically always be wrong about this. I think that if I ever felt that, I feel like I would try, and I really wanted to convince them. If I really wanted to convince them and thought that it was my responsibility and I had time, and I would try and find a way to convey that experience to them however I could. So at least I could say, I have had these specific experiences that you've not had, and that makes it very difficult for you to understand where I'm coming from for these reasons. And even if that didn't help someone understand, and I still felt they didn't understand, um, I think that I hope that I'm not sure whether this is what you're talking about, but I hope that I would never like write someone off and say whatever they say from because they're in a position of privilege in relation to me on this one issue, they can never be have a thought on this issue that's valuable to me and that might change my mind. Because I don't think that's true. I mean, I've been very wrong. I'm still learning. Like just because I'm gay doesn't mean I'm an expert on gay life and the the sort of some of the most profound things I've read about sort of heteronormativity and homophobia have been written by straight authors, and so I recognize that very often you can change your mind and have a discussion with persons who are privileged in regards to your experience and who haven't had the concrete experiences you have had. But I do think it's a really difficult question because, as I said, I had no idea how clueless I was about these things until I came out of the closet. It was it was revelatory. It was like sort of taking the red pill and escaping the matrix. It was that big.
This is a remarkable thing I'd never thought of in my privilege, that there is a difference between experiencing heteronormativity as a closeted gay person versus as an out gay person can make that much of a difference. Can you talk a little bit more about what that experience was like and what that's
It's
about?
little things that surprise me. I when I was struggling and questioning my sexuality, I would imagine what it would be like to live as an out gay man. And the big things I pretty much understood. I imagined, having people yell at me on the street, which has happened. And I imagined, occasionally feeling threatened by people and how they're acting, and that has happened too. Um, I sort of thought that I kind of got that stuff. It was the little things that I never had considered, which have sort of changed in my life, and which I recognize as being something that I was blind to, partly because of my straight privilege. And it was things like when I dated girls for a lot of the time that I was not out, and I had long relationships with them sometimes, good relationships too. Um, and one of the things that I really loved things like holding hands, just walking down the street, being physically affectionate with somebody else. I would always be shocked when I was first seeing guys for the first time that they would often be very reluctant to hold my hand in public. Like I would do that because it was what was natural to me, what I'd been doing for like 10 years. And they would not want to do that. And I suddenly, obviously I understood why, but I never even thought that like holding hands was a thing. That even the way you stand in relation to each other, like they tend to stand slightly farther away from each other when you're. I just notice they keep a certain distance just because you don't want to signal to everyone that you're a couple in every situation. Um, so little tiny things like that, like things like when I remember one time I was with the girlfriend I had for the longest time, and we were on vacation in Florida, and we were on like the Disney bus going between Disney resorts, and we were being very affectionate with each other. And someone said, "Oh, you two are such a beautiful couple. You look like newlyweds," and all this stuff. And it was very affirming, and it was lovely, and it was kind of it was sweet. I can't imagine having that experience with a guy. I just can't, except in Provincetown.
Right.
I can't imagine having that. And I never would have thought that that was something I would kind of be missing. But I can't
Okay.
imagine someone unprompted, like affirming our relationship, saying, oh, you. I mean, obviously, my friends, people I know are okay, but not someone randomly on the bus. Like, it's just different. And so it's tiny little things that are different now that I never imagined would be different that made me realize that the structures of oppression, which is kind of a wanky academic way of saying it, but are deeper and broader and more complex and more subtle than I had ever imagined. And so when I had that moment in Provincetown when I was standing amidst all these gay men, I felt, oh, I'm safe. I'm at home. I I had this like thought, which is not a profound thought, but to me it was very significant, which is, well, is this experience of being sort of safe and understood and surrounded by people who get me and who support me similar to how African American students at colleges feel when they're surrounded with other African American students? Is that how they feel, at least a little bit? And um, does that help me understand part of their college experience where they're surrounded all the time with people who they feel in some senses not like them? Um, and that sort of experience, and I don't want to draw parallels or exact equations here, but just try little windows which I feel like maybe I can at least analogize a bit and try and be more compassionate to other people.
Right.
So yeah, it was a really it's a big deal. It's not and it affects sort of all aspects of your life, aspects that I had never imagined. And I recognize that I have it relatively easy. Like I often wonder to myself, I don't like this game of sort of ranking different groups in society in terms of how oppressed they are. But my experience of being a white gay male is is different to my sister's experience of being a white straight woman. And I wonder whether, I'm still privileged in so many ways. I mean, my life hasn't significantly changed for the worse, at all from coming out. And so I still grapple with these questions. It's not just suddenly, oh, I'm out now, I suddenly understand this stuff. It's really difficult. It's a hard process. So, but in principle,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that I can certainly recognize that sometimes someone who's speaking to me who is not gay is going to have a viewpoint that I should consider and value. And it's not legitimate for me just to say, you're a straight guy, you can never understand.